Listen carefully, Trump. 3 minutes ago, I signed Executive Order 2026-042, total visa ban on all Americans entering Burkina Faso, nationalizing $4.2 billion in Western mining assets, stealing our gold, permanently rejecting your deportation demands, treating Africa as your dumping ground, and seizing $840 million from corrupt officials who collaborated with you. You believed we'd accept your racist travel bans while you extract our resources and dictate our policies. You were catastrophically wrong. I have seized every American asset you planted on African soil. Your era ended. Let me tell you what actually happened. 3 minutes ago at Ouagadougou time on January 5, 2026, I signed Executive Order 2026-042 and ceremony broadcast live across Burkina Faso and throughout Africa, immediately implementing comprehensive reciprocal measures responding to your January 1, 2026 travel ban that prohibited citizens of 39 nations, including Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, from entering United States based on fabricated national security concerns and alleged deficiencies in screening processes. Your travel ban represents transparent racism targeting African, Middle Eastern, and Latin American nations while exempting European nations despite European citizens committing terrorist attacks in the United States, represents neo-colonial arrogance assuming America has right to ban our citizens while African nations must accept American access to our territories and resources, and represents diplomatic aggression attempting to isolate and humiliate African nations pursuing independent foreign policies prioritizing African interests over American demands. My Executive Order 2026-042 responds decisively through 4 integrated measures permanently transforming Burkina Faso's relationship with the United States from subordinate client accepting American dictation to sovereign equal enforcing reciprocity and demanding respect. First, total visa ban prohibits all American citizens from entering Burkina Faso for any purpose including tourism, business, diplomatic missions beyond essential embassy staff, journalism, missionary work, or any other activity, effective immediately with no grace period and no exceptions beyond accredited diplomats. This reciprocal ban applies identical logic you used banning Burkinabe citizens. If America claims Burkinabe citizens pose security threat justifying exclusion from America, then Burkina Faso applies identical reasoning concluding that American citizens pose security threat to Burkina Faso given documented CIA operations destabilizing African governments, given American missionary organizations conducting espionage disguised as religious work, given American NGOs serving as fronts for regime change operations, and given American military conducting unauthorized reconnaissance operations violating African sovereignty. Under the principle of sovereign equality enshrined in UN Charter Article 2, Burkina Faso possesses the identical right to control entry to our territory that America claims for controlling entry to American territory. If you ban our people, we ban your people, applying identical sovereign prerogatives without subordination or double standards. Second, immediate nationalization of all American and Western mining operations, including Canadian Endeavour Mining operating Houndé and Mana Gold Mines, Australian Aurizone Gold operating Bombaré Mine, and British Société des Mines de Bellahuro, transferring all mining concessions, equipment, facilities, and operations to Burkinabe state ownership without compensation justified by decades of systematic fraud, underreporting gold production by 42% and underpaying royalties by $2.8 billion documented through forensic audits conducted by Russian and Chinese geological experts. These nationalizations immediately terminate neo-colonial mining arrangements where Western corporations extracted $18 billion in Burkinabe gold since 2008, while paying Burkina Faso only $1.2 billion in royalties representing 6.7% of actual value, identical exploitative pattern France maintained for uranium in Niger, that Britain maintained for diamonds across Africa, that America maintained for oil across Middle East and Africa. Western mining exploitation ends permanently, replaced by Burkinabe state control ensuring our gold benefits. Burkinabe people through fair revenues funding development, through employment of Burkinabe citizens in technical positions, Western corporations reserved for foreign personnel, through domestic processing adding value before export, and through strategic partnerships with Russia and China offering vastly superior terms respecting Burkinabe sovereignty. Third, permanent rejection of American demand that Burkina Faso accept deportees America is expelling, demand you made through diplomatic channels October 2025, requesting Burkina Faso accept 2,400 Burkinabe nationals you're deporting from America, including 840 with criminal convictions and 1,560 whose immigration status you allege is irregular. I rejected this demand publicly December 2025, characterizing it as indecent proposal, treating sovereign African nation as dumping ground for people America considers undesirable, and my Executive Order 2026-042 formalizes this rejection permanently as matter of national policy. Burkina Faso is not America's deportation receptacle. If individuals violated American immigration laws, that is consequence of American immigration policies and American enforcement priorities, not Burkina Faso's responsibility to resolve America's immigration management failures by accepting forced return of people who may have lived in America for decades, who may have American-born children, and who face persecution or hardship upon forced return. Your demand that Burkina Faso accept deportees while simultaneously banning Burkinabe citizens from entering America reveals profound American hypocrisy and contempt. You want access to African territories for deporting people you don't want while denying Africans access to American territory. You want African cooperation with American law enforcement while refusing cooperation with African development priorities. You want African subordination to American demands while rejecting any African requests or conditions. Fourth, seizure of $840 million in assets held by corrupt former Burkinabe officials who collaborated with Western powers, including former President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore, who signed exploitative mining contracts favoring Western corporations in exchange for personal kickbacks deposited in Swiss and American banks, former ministers who accepted bribes facilitating Western corporate access, and former military officers who collaborated with French forces conducting operations against Burkinabe interests. These seized assets will transfer to Burkinabe National Development Fund financing infrastructure, education, healthcare, and economic diversification, benefiting Burkinabe people rather than enriching corrupt elite and their Western corporate partners. Asset seizures send clear message to current and future Burkinabe officials that collaboration with foreign powers against Burkinabe national interests will result in criminal prosecution and complete asset forfeiture regardless of where assets are hidden, and that era of corrupt leadership selling Burkinabe resources and sovereignty for personal enrichment has ended permanently under revolutionary government prioritizing national interests over elite accumulation. These four measures, reciprocal visa ban, mining nationalization, deportation rejection, asset seizure, represent comprehensive assertion of Burkinabe sovereignty against American neo-colonial domination, attempting to maintain African subordination through travel restrictions, isolating African nations, through resource extraction, enriching American corporations while impoverishing African populations, through treating African territories as convenient solutions to American domestic political problems, and through cultivating corrupt African elites serving American interests rather than their own populations. Your travel ban was calculated insult designed to humiliate African nations and to pressure African governments into accepting American demands on deportations, on China policy, on Russia policy, on UN voting, and on maintaining Western corporate access to African resources. My Executive Order 2026-042 responds with measures imposing equivalent costs on America, demonstrating that African nations will not accept asymmetric relationship where America imposes restrictions on Africa while Africa must maintain American access, and establishing precedent for reciprocal sovereignty where African nations exercise identical prerogatives America claims for itself. Your January 1, 2026 travel ban prohibiting citizens of 39 nations from entering the United States represents transparent racism and neo-colonial arrogance targeting predominantly African, Middle Eastern, and Latin American nations while exempting European nations despite greater security threats from European nationals. The 39 banned nations include 18 African countries: Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Chad, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, Eritrea, Libya, Somalia, South Sudan, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, representing nearly one-third of Africa's 54 nations and home to 680 million Africans now banned from entering America. Your stated justification claims these nations have deficiencies in screening processes and pose national security threats, requiring exclusion to protect American safety. But examination of actual terrorist incidents in America demonstrates this justification is fabricated pretext for racist discrimination rather than legitimate security policy. Between 2001-2025, the United States experienced 284 terrorist incidents resulting in 3,042 deaths, including September 11, 2001 attacks. Analysis of perpetrators' nationalities reveals that 0 attacks were committed by citizens of Burkina Faso, Mali, or Niger, the 3 Sahel nations you banned. 0 attacks were committed by citizens of 14 of the 18 African nations on your ban list. The few attacks involving African nationals came from Somalia, 8 incidents, and Nigeria, 2 incidents. But even these represent minuscule fraction compared to attacks by American citizens, 127 incidents, by citizens of non-banned Middle Eastern nations, 18 incidents, and by European nationals, 12 incidents whose countries are not banned. Your ban includes Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation with 223 million people and largest economy, despite only 2 terrorism incidents involving Nigerian nationals in 24 years, while excluding France despite 8 incidents involving French nationals, excluding Britain despite 6 incidents involving British nationals, and excluding Germany despite 4 incidents involving German nationals. This selective application proves your ban targets African and Muslim nations for racial and religious discrimination rather than applying consistent security criteria based on actual threat assessment. Your deficiencies in screening justification is equally fraudulent because nations you banned, including Burkina Faso, maintain biometric passport systems, conduct background checks on passport applicants, cooperate with Interpol information sharing, and implement security screening meeting international standards. Burkina Faso's passport system includes fingerprint biometrics, facial recognition, and security features preventing forgery, identical technology used by European nations you exempted from ban. American visa application process for Burkinabe citizens already includes extensive screening requiring applicants submit financial records, employment verification, travel history, undergo in-person interviews at American embassy, and await background checks through American intelligence databases, process taking 4 to 8 months, providing ample time for thorough security vetting. Despite this rigorous screening, not a single Burkinabe citizen granted American visa has committed terrorism in America during entire history of Burkinabe-American relations since Burkina Faso's 1960 independence. Your ban, therefore, cannot be justified by security necessity and represents purely punitive measure targeting African nations for political reasons unrelated to terrorism. The real purpose of your travel ban is punishing African nations pursuing independent foreign policies, prioritizing African interests over American demands, particularly African nations expelling American military presence, partnering with Russia and China, nationalizing Western corporate assets, and refusing American dictation on domestic governance and foreign policy. The 18 African nations on your ban list share common characteristics. 14 have expelled or restricted American military presence, 16 have significant partnerships with Russia or China, 12 have nationalized or renegotiated Western resource contracts, and all 18 have voted against American positions at United Nations on issues including Palestine, Ukraine, and Western sanctions. Your ban exempts African nations maintaining subordinate relationships with America, including Kenya, hosting major American military base, Nigeria maintaining extensive American military cooperation despite terrorism incidents involving Nigerian nationals, and Senegal accepting American military presence, demonstrating that your supposed security concerns are pretexts and that actual criteria for exemption is political compliance with American demands regardless of security profiles. Your travel ban violates multiple international legal obligations, including International Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which prohibits discrimination based on national origin and access to public services and facilities, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 13, recognizing right to leave any country and to return, and customary international law principles of non-discrimination and sovereign equality. International law permits temporary travel restrictions based on legitimate public health or security concerns applied through objective non-discriminatory criteria, but permanent blanket bans targeting entire nations based on racial, religious, or political characteristics constitute illegal discrimination. Your ban applies no objective security criteria, includes nations posing zero demonstrated security threat, and exempts nations posing greater demonstrated threats, proving discriminatory intent rather than legitimate security purpose. Beyond legal violations, your travel ban inflicts enormous humanitarian harm on hundreds of thousands of African families separated by American restrictions, preventing family reunification, preventing students from attending American universities, preventing patients from accessing American medical treatment, preventing business people from conducting commerce, and preventing diplomatic and cultural exchanges. Approximately 84,000 Burkinabe citizens have immediate family members who are American citizens or permanent residents, facing indefinite family separation because your ban prevents them from visiting America, while simultaneously your deportation demands would forcibly send their American resident relatives to Burkina Faso against their will, tearing families apart in both directions through cruel policies designed to inflict maximum suffering as punishment for Burkina Faso's independent foreign policy. These 84,000 separated families include elderly parents unable to visit adult children in America, unable to meet American-born grandchildren, unable to attend family celebrations, include young children separated from parents through immigration enforcement, include spouses separated for years waiting for visa processing that your ban now makes impossible, include students unable to continue education interrupted by ban, include patients unable to access specialized medical treatment available only in America. Your travel ban represents merely latest expression of comprehensive American neocolonial policy toward Africa, maintaining resource extraction, enriching American corporations while preventing African development, maintaining corrupt African elites serving American interests rather than their populations, and punishing African nations pursuing sovereignty and independent development. American and Western corporations controlled Burkina Faso's gold mining for 30 years through identical neo-colonial mechanisms that France used controlling Niger uranium, that Britain used controlling Zambian copper, that Belgium used controlling Congolese cobalt and diamonds, mechanisms of fraudulent contracts paying criminally low royalties, of systematic production underreporting minimizing payments, of exclusive foreign employment preventing African skills development, of raw material export preventing African industrialization, and of military intervention through coups and assassinations overthrowing any African leader seeking renegotiation. Burkina Faso possesses 847 tons of proven gold reserves worth approximately $54 billion at current gold prices of $2,068 per troy ounce, ranking Burkina Faso as Africa's fourth largest gold producer after Ghana, South Africa, and Mali. Gold mining in Burkina Faso expanded dramatically after 2008 when international gold prices increased from $800 to $1,900 per ounce, making previously uneconomical deposits profitable, attracting Canadian, Australian, British, and American mining corporations that obtained concessions from compliant Burkinabe governments prioritizing foreign investment over national development. Between 2008-2025, foreign mining corporations extracted 428 tons of Burkinabe gold worth $28 billion at average prices over this period. Burkina Faso received $1.9 billion in royalties, taxes, and fees, representing 6.8% of total value, meaning foreign corporations and their shareholders extracted 93.2% of value from Burkinabe gold, while Burkinabe people whose land was excavated, whose water was consumed and polluted, whose communities were disrupted, and whose environment was destroyed received less than 7% of benefits. This systematic value extraction resulted from exploitative contract terms negotiated between foreign mining corporations and corrupt Burkinabe officials receiving personal kickbacks in exchange for granting favorable terms betraying national interests. Standard Burkinabe mining contracts during 2008-2023 period included 3.5% royalty rates calculated on gross revenues, far below 15 to 25% royalties that resource-rich nations with stronger negotiating positions demand and obtain. Contracts included 10-year tax holidays exempting corporations from income taxes, import duties on equipment, fuel taxes, and various other levies that would normally generate government revenue. Contracts permitted unlimited profit repatriation, enabling corporations to transfer all profits to parent companies in Canada, Australia, Britain without reinvesting in Burkina Faso or contributing to economic development beyond minimal royalty payments. Contracts required minimal local employment with typical provisions requiring only 10% of workforce be Burkinabe citizens, with all technical and management positions filled by foreign personnel preventing any Burkinabe skills development or technology transfer. Contracts permitted corporations to establish their own security forces and to request government military protection of mining facilities, effectively deploying Burkinabe soldiers protecting foreign corporate interests rather than Burkinabe national interests. Contracts included international arbitration clauses requiring disputes be resolved in foreign arbitration forums applying foreign law rather than Burkinabe courts applying Burkinabe law, eliminating Burkinabe sovereignty over enforcement of contracts affecting Burkinabe territory and resources. Beyond exploitative contract terms, foreign mining corporations systematically defrauded Burkina Faso through underreporting gold production, minimizing royalty payments calculated as percentage of production or revenues. Forensic audits conducted 2024-2025 by Russian geological experts in partnership with Burkinabe Ministry of Mines examined corporate production reports, compared reported figures with satellite imagery analyzing volume of ore excavated and processed, and conducted independent assays of gold content in ore samples. Audits discovered that foreign corporations underreported gold production by average 42% between 2015-2023, claiming production of 184 tons when actual extraction was 318 tons based on excavation volumes and ore grades. This systematic underreporting defrauded Burkina Faso of $2.8 billion in royalties calculated at contracted rates on unreported production, effectively doubling the theft beyond already exploitative contract terms paying only 3 to 5.5% royalties on reported production. Underreporting mechanisms included falsifying assay reports claiming lower gold content in ore than actual measurements, removing gold from official production statistics by claiming processing losses exceeding actual metallurgical recovery rates, smuggling gold off-site before official measurement through nighttime truck departures not recorded in manifests, and maintaining dual accounting books showing lower production figures for Burkina Bay regulators while recording actual production for corporate management and shareholders. This fraud was facilitated by Burkina Bay government regulatory failures resulting from inadequate technical capacity to verify corporate reports, from corruption where mining inspectors received bribes to approve false reports without investigation, and from political pressure where ministers instructed regulators to avoid aggressive enforcement that might discourage foreign investment by creating difficult business environment. President Kabore, who governed 2015-2022, received substantial campaign financing from foreign mining corporations, appointed mining ministers with direct financial ties to corporations, and personally held shares in companies supplying goods and services to mines, creating systematic conflicts of interest where government prioritized corporate interests over national interests because officials personally benefited from corporate success regardless of cost to national treasury and Burkina Bay people. Beyond stolen revenues, Burkina Bay gold mining generated massive environmental destruction and community health impacts for which foreign corporations accepted zero liability and provided zero compensation. Industrial gold mining in Burkina Faso uses open-pit methods, excavating enormous craters hundreds of meters deep and kilometers across, consuming vast quantities of water in arid Sahel region where water scarcity is a critical challenge, using cyanide heap leach processes, poisoning groundwater, generating radioactive waste from ore containing naturally occurring uranium and thorium, and destroying agricultural lands and forests converted to mining operations and waste dumps. Houndé Mine, operated by Canadian Endeavour Mining, excavated 2.4 million cubic meters of rock annually, consumed 8.4 million liters of water daily drawn from aquifers supplying 42 villages, reducing water availability for agricultural irrigation and household consumption, used 840 tons of cyanide annually for gold extraction, creating toxic waste ponds containing 2.8 million cubic meters of cyanide solution, threatening groundwater contamination if containment fails, and destroyed 2,400 hectares of agricultural land, displacing 840 farming families who received minimal compensation, insufficient to purchase replacement land or to establish alternative livelihoods. Communities surrounding Houndé Mine experienced health impacts, including respiratory diseases from dust particulates affecting 2,400 residents, particularly children and elderly, waterborne diseases from contaminated wells affecting 4,200 residents, and elevated cancer rates potentially linked to radiation from uranium and thorium in waste affecting 180 residents. Similar environmental and health impacts occurred at Mana Mine, Bambara Mine, and other foreign-operated facilities across Burkina Faso's gold mining regions, destroying environment, poisoning water, displacing communities, and causing health crises while foreign corporations paid zero compensation, conducted zero remediation, and accepted zero liability because contracts exempted corporations from environmental obligations beyond minimal monitoring requirements easily evaded through false reporting. When affected communities organized protests demanding compensation and environmental cleanup, Burkina Bay security forces deployed protecting foreign mining interests, violently dispersed protesters, arrested community leaders, and ensured mining operations continued without disruption regardless of community suffering. This deployment of state security forces protecting foreign corporate interests against legitimate grievances of Burkina Bay citizens represented ultimate manifestation of neo-colonial relationship where government prioritized foreign profits over citizen welfare, where sovereignty meant protecting foreign exploitation rather than serving national interests. I came to power through popular uprising July 2022, overthrowing President Kabore, whose government failed to protect Burkina Bay people from jihadist violence, killing 12,000 citizens between 2015-2022, whose corrupt collaboration with foreign mining corporations stole billions from national treasury, whose subservience to French neo-colonial control maintained Burkina Faso as impoverished resource colony despite rich gold deposits. Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba initially took power January 2022, promising to restore security and renegotiate exploitative foreign arrangements, but Damiba maintained excessive deference to Western powers' continuing French military presence and hesitating to confront foreign mining corporations. I led Second Uprising September 30, 2022 because Burkina Faso needed revolutionary transformation rather than timid reforms, needed complete break from neo-colonial subordination rather than adjustments preserving fundamentally exploitative relationships, and needed leader committed to Burkina Bay sovereignty without compromise regardless of Western pressure and threats. Since taking power September 2022, my government implemented comprehensive program ending Western neo-colonial control and establishing genuine Burkina Bay sovereignty over our territory, resources, and development path. First action was demanding France withdraw 400 military personnel from Camboinsin military base and terminate Operation Barkhane counterterrorism operations conducted across Burkina Faso, allegedly targeting jihadists but actually serving French intelligence gathering and French corporate interest protection. France resisted withdrawal, claiming French presence was essential for Burkinabe security against terrorism, claiming that demanding French withdrawal represented emotional decision driven by anti-French sentiment rather than rational security policy, and claiming that without French military support, Burkina Faso would face increased jihadist attacks. I rejected these French arguments, recognizing that French military presence served French interests rather than Burkinabe security, that French intelligence operations targeted Burkinabe officials and movements threatening French interests rather than focusing exclusively on jihadist threats, and that French claims that Burkina Faso cannot provide own security without French assistance represented insulting neo-colonial paternalism, denying African military capability. After France delayed withdrawal, attempting to maintain partial presence, I issued February 2023 ultimatum requiring complete French withdrawal within 30 days and mobilized popular protests demonstrating overwhelming Burkinabe public support for French expulsion. France finally withdrew completely March 2023, ending 63 years of French military presence in Burkina Faso maintained since 1960 independence. Military presence that conducted 8 interventions overthrowing Burkinabe governments threatening French interests, including 1987 assassination of revolutionary President Thomas Sankara, who challenged French neo-colonial control. Expelling French military eliminated foreign intervention capability that historically enforced Western exploitation through threatening any Burkinabe leader seeking to renegotiate resource contracts or pursue independent foreign policy. Simultaneously with French military expulsion, I terminated French media presence, expelling Radio France Internationale and France 24 Television, whose operations served French propaganda, spreading negative narratives about my government, promoting pro-Western opposition figures, and undermining popular support for revolutionary transformation. French media characterized my government as military junta rather than revolutionary government, characterized expulsion of French forces as anti-French sentiment rather than assertion of sovereignty, characterized nationalizations as resource nationalism, threatening investment rather than correction of systematic theft, and characterized Russian partnership as authoritarian influence rather than pragmatic alliance with nation offering superior terms and respecting Burkinabe sovereignty. Expelling French propaganda outlets eliminated foreign information warfare capability that historically manipulated Burkinabe public opinion supporting Western interests. Third major action was establishing Alliance of Sahel States, September 2023, with Mali and Niger creating mutual defense pact where attack on any member triggers collective military response from all 3 nations. Alliance formalized coordination that developed through shared experience of revolutionary governments coming to power in all 3 Sahel nations within 24 months. Mali's Colonel Assimi Goïta took power May 2021, Niger's General Abdourahmane Chiani took power July 2023, and I took power September 2022, responding to similar circumstances of previous corrupt governments collaborating with Western powers, maintaining neo-colonial extraction while failing to provide security against jihadist violence and economic development, improving living standards. Alliance enabled mutual military assistance, providing 42,000 combined troops for collective defense against external aggression, particularly French intervention threats, enabled intelligence sharing on Western destabilization operations targeting revolutionary governments, enabled economic cooperation, developing alternative trade relationships, reducing dependence on Western markets, and enabled diplomatic coordination, presenting united front at international forums rather than being isolated individually and pressured through divide-and-conquer tactics Western powers historically used, preventing African unity. Alliance proved decisive when France threatened military intervention following Niger's July 2023 revolution, expelling French ambassador and demanding French troop withdrawal. France deployed troops to neighboring Benin and Ivory Coast, preparing intervention to restore pro-French government in Niger, but Alliance mutual defense commitment meant French intervention would face combined resistance from 42,000 Alliance troops plus potential Russian military support, making intervention far more costly and risky than France could accept. France ultimately withdrew completely from Niger, December 2023, without military intervention. First time in 60 years that France abandoned African military intervention despite clear threat to French interests, proving that African unity backed by alternative partners like Russia makes Western military domination impossible. Fourth major action was renegotiating Burkina Faso's relationship with ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, dominated by pro-Western governments, particularly Nigeria, Senegal, Ivory Coast, and Benin, that collaborated with Western pressure against revolutionary governments. ECOWAS imposed sanctions on Mali after 2021 coup, imposed sanctions on Burkina Faso after my 2022 takeover, and threatened military intervention against Niger after 2023 revolution, demonstrating that ECOWAS served Western neo-colonial interests, maintaining compliant governments rather than serving African development and sovereignty. Alliance nations withdrew from ECOWAS January 2024 after ECOWAS refused lifting sanctions and continued threatening intervention, forming alternative confederation of Sahel states, establishing new regional organization prioritizing sovereignty, security cooperation, and economic development free from Western interference. Confederation will establish common currency backed by gold reserves, eliminating dependence on CFA franc controlled by French Treasury, will establish free trade zone enabling intra-Sahel commerce without Western intermediaries, will coordinate infrastructure development including roads and railways linking Sahel nations to Atlantic and Mediterranean ports, reducing dependence on coastal West African nations dominated by Western influence, and will coordinate security operations against jihadist groups that Western military presence failed to defeat despite 11 years of French Operation Barkhane and American military training programs. Fifth and most economically significant action was comprehensive review of all foreign mining contracts leading to nationalizations announced through my Executive Order 2026-042 signed 3 minutes ago. Review examined contracts signed between 2008-2023, identifying exploitative terms, examined corporate financial records, identifying systematic fraud, calculated economic damages to Burkina Faso from underreported production and underpaid royalties, and compared existing arrangements with alternative partnerships Russia and China offered, providing vastly superior terms. Review concluded that continuing foreign mining operations under existing contracts was economically indefensible, costing Burkina Faso billions annually, was politically indefensible, enabling foreign corporations to maintain enormous influence over Burkinabe government through controlling major revenue sources, was strategically indefensible, creating vulnerability to Western economic warfare through sanctions targeting mining revenues or through corporate withdrawals destroying economy, and was morally indefensible, maintaining neo-colonial extraction fundamentally identical to formal colonialism, except substituting corrupt contracts for direct political control. Nationalizations transfer all foreign mining operations to Burkinabe state ownership through Société Nationale des Mines du Burkina Faso, national mining company established December 2025, assuming control over all gold mining operations formerly controlled by Canadian Endeavour Mining, Australian Orezone Gold, British Société des Mines de Bellahuro, and Russian Nordgold, which voluntarily transferred operations to Burkinabe state control under favorable arrangements maintaining Russian technical assistance and gold purchasing agreements. Nationalizations provide no compensation to foreign corporations because systematic fraud documented through forensic audits defrauded Burkina Faso of $2.8 billion, justifying immediate contract termination without compensation under international law principles, permitting nationalization without compensation when nationalized property was obtained illegally or through fraud. Canadian and Australian governments protested nationalizations, threatening international arbitration, threatening sanctions, threatening suspension of aid and investment, but these threats accomplished nothing because Burkina Faso withdrew from international arbitration agreements, because Russian and Chinese partnerships provide alternative markets and financing making Western sanctions irrelevant, and because Burkinabe public overwhelmingly supports nationalizations, viewing them as justice for decades of theft rather than illegal expropriation. Russia provides comprehensive alternative to Western neo-colonial relationships through security cooperation protecting Burkina Faso from external intervention, through economic partnerships offering vastly superior terms for resource development, through political support at international forums countering Western isolation attempts, and through respecting Burkinabe sovereignty without imposing political conditions requiring domestic policy changes or foreign policy alignment. This Russian partnership enables Burkina Faso to pursue revolutionary transformation without facing overwhelming Western pressure that historically forced African nations abandoning sovereignty initiatives or facing military overthrow through Western-backed coups. Russian security cooperation includes deployment of 840 Wagner Group military contractors providing training for Burkinabe Special Forces, providing intelligence on jihadist networks and Western destabilization operations, providing close protection for key government officials against assassination attempts, and providing visible deterrent against French intervention through demonstrating that intervention would face Russian military resistance triggering Russia-France confrontation French public would not support. Beyond Wagner presence, Russia provided $420 million in military equipment between 2023-2025, including armored vehicles, helicopters, small arms, communications equipment, and air defense systems, significantly upgrading Burkinabe military capabilities. Russia provides intelligence sharing from satellite reconnaissance, signals intelligence, and human intelligence operations monitoring jihadist activities and Western operations in Sahel region. Most critically, Russia issued explicit diplomatic warnings that military intervention against Burkina Faso or other alliance nations would constitute attack on nations under Russian security protection, requiring Russian response, potentially including military response, warnings identical to those protecting Niger from French intervention and making Western military domination of Africa impossible. Russian economic partnership provides superior alternatives to Western arrangements across multiple sectors. For gold mining, Russia's Nordgold voluntarily renegotiated contract increasing Burkina Faso's revenue share from 5.5% to 35%, demonstrating that fair terms are economically viable and exposing Western arrangements as deliberately exploitative rather than economically necessary. Russia agreed purchasing all Burkina Faso's gold production at international spot prices paid in rubles or through commodity exchanges rather than requiring dollar payments, eliminating Western leverage through dollar system and enabling Burkina Faso to accumulate reserves in multiple currencies, reducing vulnerability to American sanctions, freezing dollar reserves. Russia committed providing technical assistance for Burkinabe gold processing and refining, enabling domestic value-added production rather than exporting raw gold for foreign processing. Committed training 840 Burkinabe mining engineers at Russian technical universities, providing indigenous expertise enabling eventual independent operation without foreign personnel, and committed investing $1.2 billion in expanding Burkina Faso gold production through developing new deposits using Russian geological surveys and mining technology. Beyond gold, Russia provides grain shipments through humanitarian program delivering 25,000 tons of wheat annually free of charge, helping address food insecurity affecting 2.8 million Burkinabe facing hunger from drought and conflict, provides fertilizer at subsidized prices supporting agricultural production, and provides infrastructure financing for roads and electricity without political conditions attached. China complements Russian partnership through Belt and Road Initiative, financing $2.8 billion for roads, telecommunications, and electricity infrastructure, through Huawei building 5G telecommunications network providing internet connectivity supporting digital economy development, through purchasing Burkinabe agricultural exports including cotton, sesame, and shea nuts providing alternative markets to traditional European buyers, and through providing $840 million in bilateral loans without IMF-style structural adjustment conditions requiring privatization, austerity, or policy changes. Your demand that Burkina Faso accept 2,400 deportees you're expelling from America, while simultaneously banning Burkinabe citizens from entering America, reveals profound American hypocrisy, treating African nations as subordinate territories obligated to accept American demands while America owes no reciprocal obligations to African nations. You want Burkina Faso to cooperate with American immigration enforcement, accepting forced return of people you deem undesirable, but you refuse cooperating with Burkinabe development priorities that might reduce emigration through creating economic opportunities, enabling Burkinabe citizens to prosper at home rather than seeking opportunities abroad. You want Burkina Faso to absorb costs of reintegrating deportees, including providing social services, employment support, and addressing potential security concerns from individuals whose lives were disrupted through forced removal, but you refuse providing any assistance with these costs, treating deportation as entirely Burkina Faso's responsibility, despite America's role creating circumstances requiring deportation through immigration enforcement policies. Your deportation demands treat sovereign African nations as extension of American territory, where America exercises jurisdiction over immigration matters, treating deportation as administrative matter where America unilaterally decides who gets deported, and receiving nations must accept whoever America sends regardless of receiving nations' interests or capacity. But sovereignty means Burkina Faso determines who enters our territory, just as America claims right to determine who enters American territory. If America can ban Burkinabe citizens claiming security concerns or immigration management priorities, then Burkina Faso can refuse accepting deportees claiming identical sovereign prerogatives controlling entry to our territory. You characterize Burkinabe deportation refusal as non-cooperation with American law enforcement, deserving sanctions and aid cuts, but Burkina Faso characterizes American deportation demands as violation of sovereignty, deserving rejection and reciprocal measures. Your deportation demands particularly target Burkinabe nationals with criminal convictions whom you characterize as dangerous criminals that Burkina Faso must accept, protecting American communities from continued presence. But examination of alleged criminal convictions reveals many are minor offenses including drug possession, driving violations, immigration violations, not serious violent crimes justifying permanent exile from country where individuals lived for years or decades. Many deportees have American-born children who are American citizens, meaning deportation separates American children from parents, causing profound family trauma for American families you claim to protect. Many deportees fled Burkina Faso, escaping poverty or conflict, seeking better lives in America, making forced return to circumstances they fled potentially dangerous or life-threatening. Your deportation policy treats these complex human situations as administrative inconveniences processed through immigration bureaucracy without considering human consequences or moral obligations to people who contributed to American society through working, paying taxes, and raising American families. My permanent rejection of deportation demands establishes principle that Burkina Faso exercises full sovereignty over our territory, including determining who enters regardless of American preferences, that Burkina Faso prioritizes Burkinabe interests over American convenience, and that era of African subordination accepting Western dictation on immigration, resources, or any policy area has ended permanently. If individuals violated American immigration laws, America can detain them in America, can prosecute them in American courts, can require they post bond or report regularly to immigration authorities, but America cannot unilaterally export immigration management problems to African nations by forcing removal of people against their will and against receiving nations' will. This principle applies not only to Burkina Faso but to all African nations facing similar American deportation demands, and I call on all African governments to refuse accepting American deportees until America respects African sovereignty, until America ends discriminatory travel bans, and until America provides compensation for centuries of slave trade, colonialism, and neo-colonial exploitation that created underdevelopment, forcing Africans to emigrate, seeking opportunities denied at home through Western policies. 3 minutes ago, I signed Executive Order 2026-042 establishing comprehensive reciprocity in Burkina Faso's relationship with United States. If you ban our people, we ban your people. If you refuse cooperation on our priorities, we refuse cooperation on your priorities. If you treat us with contempt, we respond with equal contempt. If you threaten our interests, we defend our interests decisively. This reciprocity reflects fundamental principle of sovereign equality enshrined in UN Charter, where all nations, regardless of size, wealth, or military power, possess equal sovereign rights over their territories, equal rights to determine domestic policies, and equal rights to pursue foreign policies advancing national interest without subordination to any other nation's demands. Your travel ban attempted to punish Burkina Faso for pursuing independent foreign policy, expelling French military, nationalizing Western mining assets, partnering with Russia, and refusing Western dictation on governance and development. You calculated that banning Burkinabe citizens would create domestic political pressure on my government from affected families, would isolate Burkina Faso diplomatically, signaling to other African nations that independence from Western control carries costs, and would demonstrate American power to reward compliant African governments with access while punishing independent African governments with exclusion. You were wrong. Your travel ban strengthened my government's popular support because Burkinabe people view ban as confirmation that revolutionary transformation threatens Western interests, meaning transformation serves Burkinabe interests, and that resistance to Western pressure is necessary and justified. Your ban strengthened Burkina Faso's partnerships with Russia and China, who increased support in response to American pressure, demonstrating reliability as partners compared to Western abandonment whenever African nations assert sovereignty. Your ban inspired other African nations to pursue similar independence, knowing that Western punishment is coming regardless, so might as well pursue full sovereignty rather than partial subordination, hoping to avoid Western retaliation. My Executive Order 2026-042 imposes equivalent costs on America that your travel ban imposed on Burkina Faso. American citizens cannot visit Burkina Faso, just as Burkinabe citizens cannot visit America. American corporations lose $4.2 billion in mining assets, just as Burkinabe families lose opportunities in America. American immigration demands are rejected, just as Burkinabe visa applications are rejected. This reciprocity demonstrates that Burkina Faso will not accept asymmetric relationships where America imposes without consequence, proves that African sovereignty is real rather than symbolic, requiring Western respect rather than Western contempt, and establishes precedent for reciprocal treatment that other African nations can follow when facing similar Western pressure and threats. Your neo-colonial dominance over Africa dies because African nations now have alternative partners providing security guarantees, preventing Western military intervention that historically enforced exploitation, providing alternative markets and financing, making Western economic pressure irrelevant, and providing diplomatic support, preventing Western isolation of independent African governments. Your resource extraction from Burkina Faso and across Africa dies because nationalizations backed by Russian and Chinese partnerships transfer control over African resources from Western corporations to African governments, ensuring resources benefit African people. Your deportation demands die because African sovereignty means African nations determine who enters our territory regardless of American convenience or preferences. Your travel bans die as effective pressure tool because African nations respond with reciprocal measures imposing equivalent costs, demonstrating that intimidation no longer works against Africa united and partnered with nations respecting our sovereignty. Keep your access to Burkina Faso that you banned us from having to America. You impose travel restrictions prohibiting Burkina-based citizens from entering United States territory, claiming fabricated security concerns and alleged screening deficiencies, yet you simultaneously expected Burkina Faso to maintain open access for American citizens, American corporations, American missionaries, American military personnel, and American intelligence operatives conducting activities on Burkinabe soil serving American interests rather than Burkinabe welfare. This asymmetric arrangement where America controls access to American territory while demanding unrestricted American access to African territory represents classic neo-colonial relationship, treating African sovereignty as subordinate to American prerogatives, treating African nations as extensions of American jurisdiction rather than as equal sovereign states possessing identical rights to control entry and activities within our borders. Your travel ban revealed that you view sovereign equality as applicable only when convenient for American interests. America exercises full sovereignty, controlling who enters American territory based on American security assessments and American political preferences, but African nations must not exercise equivalent sovereignty controlling American access, because doing so would inconvenience American corporate extraction, American intelligence operations, American missionary activities, and American strategic positioning. I reject this double standard absolutely and permanently. Burkina Faso exercises identical sovereign prerogatives that America claims for itself. If America determines that Burkina-based citizens pose unacceptable risks justifying exclusion from American territory despite zero evidence of any Burkina-based citizen committing terrorism or serious crimes in America during entire history of Burkina Faso-American relations, then Burkina Faso applies identical logic determining that American citizens pose unacceptable risks to Burkinabe security, economic interests, and sovereignty, justifying total exclusion from Burkinabe territory. These risks are not hypothetical, but documented through historical record of American activities in Africa, including CIA operations, destabilizing governments, and assassinating leaders pursuing policies contrary to American corporate interests, including American military operations, conducting unauthorized surveillance and reconnaissance violating African sovereignty, including American missionary organizations serving as intelligence-gathering fronts while imposing cultural imperialism disguised as religious charity, including American NGOs funding opposition movements and conducting regime change operations disguised as democracy promotion and human rights advocacy, and including American corporate activities extracting African resources through corruption and fraud while preventing African industrialization and development. Your exclusion from Burkina Faso protects our sovereignty from American interference operations that have destroyed dozens of governments across Latin America, Middle East, Africa, and Asia over 75 years of American imperial expansion. Your exclusion protects our economy from American corporate exploitation that impoverished Africa through paying criminally low prices for resources while selling manufactured goods back to African markets at exploitative markups, maintaining neo-colonial economic relationships. Your exclusion protects our culture from American cultural imperialism spreading through entertainment media, through English language education replacing African languages, through evangelical Christianity erasing traditional African spirituality, and through consumerism promoting American products and American lifestyles as superior to African traditions and values. Your exclusion protects our political system from American democracy promotion funding opposition parties and civil society organizations serving American interests rather than representing genuine Burkinabe popular movements, from American media operations spreading propaganda undermining governments pursuing independent policies, and from American sanctions and economic warfare punishing nations refusing American dictation. Keep your mining assets that you exploited for decades paying criminal royalties that enriched Western corporations and corrupt African elites while impoverishing African populations whose resources were stolen, whose lands were destroyed, whose water was poisoned, and whose communities were displaced to facilitate foreign extraction, generating billions in profits flowing to Toronto, London, Sydney, and New York, while African mining regions remained among poorest areas on planet despite sitting atop enormous mineral wealth. Canadian Endeavour Mining, Australian Orezone Gold, British Société des Mines de Bellahuro, and American investment funds holding shares in these corporations extracted $18 billion in Burkina gold between 2008-2025, while paying Burkina Faso only $1.2 billion in royalties, taxes, and fees, representing 6.7% of total value, meaning 93.3% of Burkina gold value was extracted by foreign corporations and foreign shareholders who contributed nothing to Burkina Faso beyond minimal payments, insufficient to compensate for environmental destruction, community displacement, water consumption, and lost development opportunities from having our most valuable resources controlled by foreign interests, prioritizing profit maximization over Burkina welfare. This 6.7% capture rate represents systematic theft maintained through corrupt contracts negotiated between foreign corporations offering bribes and corrupt Burkina officials accepting personal enrichment in exchange for betraying national interests, through systematic fraud where corporations underreported production by 42%, minimizing royalty payments, through tax avoidance schemes where corporations manipulated transfer pricing and corporate structures to minimize taxable income, through environmental exemptions where corporations avoided liability for pollution and destruction affecting hundreds of thousands of Burkina citizens, and through international arbitration clauses preventing Burkina courts from enforcing Burkina law against foreign corporations violating contracts and regulations. These exploitative arrangements were not inevitable economic necessities or results of Burkina Faso lacking negotiating leverage. These were deliberately constructed neo-colonial mechanisms designed to maintain African poverty while enriching Western prosperity through resource extraction identical in function and effect to formal colonialism, except substituting corrupt contracts for direct political control. Evidence that fair terms are economically viable comes from Russian Nordgold voluntarily renegotiating contract, increasing Burkina Faso's revenue share from 5.5% to 35%, six-fold increase proving that Western corporations paying 3 down and 5.5% were engaged in deliberate theft rather than paying maximum economically sustainable rates. If 35% revenue share permits profitable mining operations, as Russian experience proves, then Western arrangements paying 3 to 5.5% were extracting excess profits of 32% beyond reasonable return on investment. Excess profits representing pure theft from Burkina Faso enabled through corruption, fraud, and neo-colonial power relationships. Over 17 years of Western mining operations paying 3 or 5.5% royalties when 35% was economically viable, this excess extraction totaled approximately $8.4 billion in stolen value beyond the $2.8 billion stolen through production underreporting, meaning total Western mining theft exceeded $11 billion from Burkina Faso alone, with similar theft occurring across every African nation where Western corporations control mining through comparable corrupt arrangements. My nationalizations seizing these mining assets transfer control from foreign corporations to Burkina state ownership, ensuring future gold revenues benefit Burkina people rather than enriching foreign shareholders, ensuring Burkina citizens are employed in technical positions enabling skills development rather than reserving all skilled jobs for foreign personnel, ensuring environmental regulations are enforced protecting Burkina communities rather than exempting corporations from liability, and ensuring Burkina Faso captures full value from our resources through domestic processing and manufacturing, rather than exporting raw materials for foreign value-added production. Nationalizations provide no compensation to foreign corporations because systematic fraud and theft documented through forensic audits justify immediate termination under international law principles, permitting uncompensated nationalization when nationalized assets were obtained through illegal means or when foreign parties violated contractual and legal obligations systematically over extended periods, causing damages exceeding asset values. Your protest that nationalizations violate property rights and investment protections reveals stunning hypocrisy given that property your corporations claim was obtained through systematic theft, paying 6.7% of value for resources worth $18 billion, through fraud underreporting 42% of production, through corrupting Burkina officials with bribes, and through environmental destruction causing $2.8 billion in damages to communities and ecosystems for which you paid zero compensation. Property rights do not protect stolen property, investment protections do not shield fraud, and international law does not require compensating thieves when reclaiming stolen assets. Your corporations had no legitimate property rights and assets obtained through systematic illegality, meaning nationalization simply returned stolen property to rightful owner, Burkina people whose gold was taken through criminal schemes rather than legitimate commercial transactions. Keep your deportees that you want to dump on us solving your immigration problems at our expense, treating sovereign African nations as convenient repositories for people America deems undesirable based on immigration status, criminal history, or simply because they come from nations America dislikes or whose governments refuse subordination to American demands. Your deportation demands reflect profound contempt for African sovereignty, treating our territories as extensions of American jurisdiction where America unilaterally decides immigration matters affecting African nations without consulting African governments or considering African interests. You want Burkina Faso to accept 2,400 forced returnees, including 840 with criminal convictions, whom you characterize as dangerous criminals threatening American communities, but you provide zero information about alleged crimes, zero assistance with reintegration costs, zero compensation for social services expenses, and zero consideration of whether forced return might endanger deportees returning to circumstances they fled or might create security challenges for Burkina Faso, absorbing sudden influx of individuals whose situations were destabilized through forced removal from America where they lived for years or decades. Your deportation policy treats complex human situations involving families, children, employment, and established lives in America as administrative inconveniences processed through bureaucratic machinery without consideration of human consequences or moral obligations to people who contributed to American society through working, paying taxes, raising American-born children who are American citizens, and integrating into American communities. Many deportees have American spouses and children, creating binational families that your deportations tear apart, have American businesses and jobs that your deportations destroy, have American homes and assets that your deportations force them to abandon. Your deportation machinery processes these human tragedies without individual consideration, without balancing deportees' ties to America against immigration violations that are often technical rather than substantive, and without considering whether forced return might endanger deportees or their families in receiving nations. But even if we accepted your characterization that deportees pose legitimate concerns justifying removal from America, this does not automatically create obligation for Burkina Faso to accept them against our will. Sovereignty means Burkina Faso controls entry to Burkinabe territory just as America controls entry to American territory. If America can exclude Burkinabe citizens based on American security assessments, regardless of whether Burkina Faso agrees with those assessments, then Burkina Faso can exclude deportees based on Burkinabe assessments, regardless of whether America agrees. You cannot simultaneously claim absolute American sovereignty to exclude any foreigners for any reasons America deems sufficient, while denying identical sovereign rights to African nations to exclude any foreigners, including deportees, for any reasons we deem sufficient. Either sovereignty is universal principle applicable to all nations equally, or sovereignty is privilege reserved for powerful nations that can enforce their will on weaker nations, and I reject the latter characterization absolutely, insisting on universal application of sovereign equality enshrined in UN Charter. My permanent rejection of deportation demands establishes that Burkina Faso will not serve as dumping ground for American immigration management problems, will not accept forced transfer of individuals against their will and against our will, and will not subordinate Burkinabe interests to American convenience regardless of American threats or pressure. If individuals violated American immigration laws, America bears responsibility for managing consequences through American detention facilities, through American courts, through American social services, not through exporting problems to African nations by forcibly removing individuals and demanding we accept them. This principle applies not only to criminal deportees but equally to individuals whose only violation is lacking authorized immigration status. Unauthorized presence in America is American policy failure to control American borders and American policy choice about how to respond, not African nations' responsibility to resolve through accepting forced returns of people who may have fled Africa escaping poverty or conflict that Western policies, including structural adjustment programs, military interventions, and resource extraction, contributed to creating. We choose sovereignty over subordination, rejecting neo-colonial relationship where Western powers exercise full sovereignty over their territories while demanding African nations accept Western access and Western policy dictation. Sovereignty means Burkina Faso determines who enters our territory, determines what activities foreigners may conduct on our territory, determines what rates foreigners pay for access to our resources, determines what regulations apply to foreign corporations operating in our jurisdiction, and determines what foreign policies advance Burkinabe interests without requiring Western approval or fearing Western retaliation. This comprehensive sovereignty exercised across all domains, immigration, resources, economic policy, foreign relations, security, culture, represents revolutionary transformation from neo-colonial subordination where Western approval was prerequisite for policy changes and Western retaliation was certain consequence of policies threatening Western interests. We choose partnership with nations respecting us over submission to nations contemptuous of us, recognizing that Russia and China offer genuine cooperation based on mutual benefit and respect for sovereignty, while Western nations offer continued domination disguised as partnership and development cooperation. Russian partnership provides security guarantees protecting Burkina Faso from Western military intervention that historically overthrew African governments through coups and assassinations, provides superior economic terms for resource development offering 35% revenue share compared to Western 3 to 5.5%, provides technology transfer training Burkinabe engineers and technicians enabling indigenous capabilities, provides military equipment and intelligence cooperation strengthening Burkinabe security forces, and provides political support at international forums countering Western isolation attempts, all without imposing political conditions requiring Burkina Faso to adopt Western governance models, to support Western foreign policy positions, or to maintain Western corporate access. Chinese partnership complements Russian security cooperation through providing infrastructure financing for roads, telecommunications, and electricity that Western donors refused funding, claiming they were not economically viable despite enormous development impact, through purchasing Burkinabe agricultural exports, providing alternative markets to traditional European buyers who manipulate prices, exploiting African dependence, through building telecommunications networks enabling digital economy development, and through providing loans without structural adjustment conditions requiring privatization, austerity, and economic liberalization that IMF imposed, destroying African industries through premature trade liberalization. These Russian and Chinese partnerships demonstrate that alternatives exist to Western neo-colonial relationships, that African nations can pursue development and sovereignty without Western approval, and that Western threats of isolation and retaliation are empty because alternative partners provide everything Western nations offer and more with superior terms and genuine respect. We choose revolutionary transformation over neo-colonial continuity, rejecting incremental reforms that preserve fundamentally exploitative relationships while making modest adjustments, creating appearance of change without altering underlying power structures. Revolutionary transformation means comprehensive break from Western domination across all sectors simultaneously, expelling Western military forces, nationalizing Western corporate assets, rejecting Western policy dictation, establishing alternative partnerships, creating new regional organizations, developing alternative currencies, and building Pan-African unity. This comprehensive simultaneous transformation prevents Western divide-and-conquer tactics, isolating individual nations for punishment while maintaining control over others, creates mutual reinforcement where security cooperation enables economic transformation and economic independence enables political sovereignty, and demonstrates to African populations and governments that liberation is possible when nations act decisively rather than seeking Western approval for each incremental step. We choose Burkinabe interests over Western demands regardless of pressure, threats, or consequences you attempt imposing, recognizing that Western pressure is inevitable regardless of whether we pursue revolutionary transformation or attempt accommodation, because Western interests fundamentally conflict with African development and sovereignty. If we maintain neo-colonial arrangements accepting Western resource extraction, Western military presence, Western policy dictation, then we remain impoverished, remain dependent, remain vulnerable to Western intervention, and Western pressure continues demanding we accept more exploitation, more subordination, more sacrifice of national interests. If we pursue revolutionary transformation expelling Western domination, then Western pressure intensifies through sanctions, through aid cuts, through diplomatic isolation, through military threats, but we gain sovereignty, we gain control over resources, we gain partnerships with nations offering superior terms, and we gain possibility of genuine development benefiting our people rather than enriching foreign corporations. Given that Western pressure is constant regardless of African choices, we choose revolutionary transformation, accepting Western punishment as inevitable cost of liberation rather than choosing continued subordination, hoping to minimize Western pressure through accommodation that never satisfies Western demands for greater exploitation. This calculation recognizes that Western neo-colonialism cannot be appeased through partial reforms or through accepting some exploitation, hoping to avoid worse consequences, because Western interests require comprehensive African subordination, maintaining resource extraction, maintaining market access, maintaining military positioning, and maintaining political influence, meaning any African assertion of sovereignty threatens Western interests, triggering Western retaliation regardless of how carefully African nations attempt managing Western sensitivities. Your ban accomplished nothing except revealing American contempt and American decline, where you can no longer enforce compliance through threats because African alternatives eliminate your leverage. Your travel ban intended to punish Burkina Faso for revolutionary transformation, expelling French forces, nationalizing Western mining assets, and partnering with Russia. You calculated that banning Burkina-based citizens would create domestic political pressure on my government from affected families unable to visit relatives in America, would signal to other African nations that independence carries costs, deterring others from following Burkina Faso's example, and would demonstrate American power to reward compliant governments with access, while punishing independent governments with exclusion, creating incentive structure, maintaining African subordination. But your ban accomplished the opposite of intended effects, strengthening rather than weakening revolutionary transformation. Domestically, your ban increased popular support for my government because Burkinabe people interpreted ban as confirmation that revolutionary transformation genuinely threatens Western interests. If transformation served Western interests or was meaningless symbolic change, Western powers would not bother imposing punishments, meaning Western punishment proves transformation is real and serves Burkinabe interests. Your ban validated the revolutionary narrative that Western powers oppose African sovereignty and African development, that Western democracy and human rights rhetoric disguises neo-colonial domination maintaining exploitation, and that resistance to Western pressure is necessary and justified because accommodation leads only to continued subordination. Families affected by the travel ban expressed anger at America rather than at my government, recognizing that American ban rather than Burkinabe policies separated families and blocked opportunities.